Senator Byrd, Senator Neal, Senator Westerfield,
Here from Crofton.
Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Kulkarni,
Here.
Representative Timoney,
Here from the 45th District.
Jameer Davis, Hannah Drake,
Here.
Ricky Jones,
Here from Louisville.
OJ Oleka, Erwin Roberts,
Present.
Co-Chair Givens,
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Hevron.
Present. Thank you, and a special welcome to our new members who have been appointed to this commission since our last meeting. We look forward to working with you on these very important issues. I need to go ahead and get an approval of the July 20th, 2021 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
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 Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off with the minority sentencing and parole in Kentucky, but we're actually going to start with Ms. Jones first, the chair of the parole board. And I believe she's online.
I am. Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, ma'am.
You can go ahead and get started with your presentation.
Okay. I was asked just to present on some information, some numbers as it pertains to racial disparities in the parole system. And I will tell you, there's the inmate population from 2020. That total inmate population was 20,125. Of that total population, the racial breakdown was 16 American Indian or Alaskan Native, 31 Asian or Pacific Islander, 249 biracial, 4,380 Black or African American, 293 Hispanic or Latino, 14 unknown, and 15,142 white. The parolee population was about 10,243. That breakdown is 5 American Indian, 27 Asian or Pacific Islander, 91 biracial, 1,886 Black, 101 Hispanic or Latino, 9 unknown, and 8,124 white. When you look at that as compared to recidivism rates, for 2020, and those are reflectives of those released in 2018. You have 2,790 inmates who are Black or African American that were released, and 304 of those recidivated with a new commitment, and those were Black inmates. The ones that came back on a technical violation were 483. As compared to white inmates, 14,356 of those inmates were released. 1,669 of those recidivated with a new commitment, and 3,659 of those were recidivated with a technical violation. There are some other breakdowns for Hispanic and other races as well, if you would like those. That's pretty much the gist of the statistics that I have from the parole board. Are there any questions?
Do any members have any questions? Okay, Representative Brown.
Thank you for the information and thank you for the report. Can you provide us with the percentages of the population of the persons that are prisoners and that are in parole? You didn't have that in your report. If you did, I missed it.
The Black inmates make up about 21% of the inmate population and about 18% of the parolee population.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members?
Mr. Westerfield, I can provide these statistics to you if you would like them in response to your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. That'd be helpful. I couldn't write them down as quickly as you were rattling those off.
My apologies.
Oh,
Ms.
no,
Jones,
you're fine.
if you could actually send that to us, that would be great, just so we can disperse that information to our members that are here who came a little late, and then those who are not able to join us today, just so we can have that.
Okay. And I will add that though we do recognize based on these statistics that there are some disparities as far as it pertains to the racial makeup of the parolee population and the inmate population. It looks like African-American, Black inmates are paroled at a lower rate than white or other inmates. So we're hoping to look at some of those things, maybe explore some additional training. I do presentation to the board and some other departments within the Department of Corrections on navigating implicit bias in the correctional setting. So hopefully training such as that and some additional trainings on a national level can help us increase those numbers as it pertains to Black or African-American inmates.
Thank you for that. I believe Chairman Givens has a question.
Yes.
Ms. Jones, thank you for the information. And question I have is related to the period of time when you say 2020, a population, let's just take one number for example. I think you indicated the population is 20,125.
Yes, inmate population.
Yes. Is that a snapshot at a certain moment in time, or is that a period of time? Help me to understand what the data is telling us.
That data is for the entire, as of the end of 2020. That is what the inmate population consisted of.
So that would be on the date of 12/31/2020, the population was 20,125.
Yes.
And all the other numbers are on that same date, I presume.
Yes, these are all last year's data.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and get moving on to the representatives from AOC. Ms. Jones, thank you so much for coming today and providing us that information.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'll introduce yourself for the record, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative. My name is Laurie Dudgeon. I'm the Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts, and I know both the folks. Rachel, if you want to go.
I'm Rachel Bingham. I'm the Director of Statewide Programs for the AOC.
And I'm Patrick Carrington, the Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator for the Administrative Office of the Courts.
And I apologize. We sent you a rather lengthy presentation, and it's probably about a 45-minute one, but we're not going to do that to you. We're going to try to do this in about 15 minutes or less and hope that if you have follow-up questions, we'd be happy to send you any additional material you need. Rachel, if you want to go ahead, we're going to jump in. So I think with Rachel, you've got the first slide. Go ahead.
So we're really excited to be here and share a lot of the efforts that have happened through the Court of Justice. I'm a little bit embarrassed to talk about Senate Bill 200 when Senator Westerfield is on the line. Oh, is it on? My apologies. Thank you. A little embarrassed to talk about Senate Bill 200 when Senator Westerfield is on the line because he is the expert on the juvenile justice reforms. So what we have found through this work that started in 2014 is that the goals of those reforms were successful in regards to being able to allow for opportunity to have kids that we see within the system that had low-level misdemeanor offenses being able to be kept out of the system. So it worked effectively, efficiently. We were able to really make an impact around that front door and be able to provide more diversion opportunities for our youth and be able to give really a graduated response to how we handle kids within the juvenile justice system.
So I think one of the things that really got our attention early in the process really of the reform efforts after Senate Bill 200 was when we saw this data. So what we saw is that our reform efforts were particularly effective for our white kids, and they were frankly less effective for our kids of color. So the deeper you got into the system, frankly, it's where we began to see more and more disparities. And I think if you'll take a minute to sort of study this slide, you'll see what we're talking about. The legend is at the bottom, but if the population in Kentucky is 11% of the population, what we see, 25% of the complaints, Rachel, if you want, were against kids of color.
Yeah. So these are looking at all kids that come into the juvenile justice system at the level of complaint. And so the first category is population of youth. Second category is what comes in the door, those kids that are diversion eligible, those kids that or potentially could be diversion eligible. Those are also those kids that we potentially have at that first point of intake. So in the adult side, it would be what we would call the arrest. In the juvenile side, we call that the complaint, excuse me. The second category at 28% you see on the response to our Black youth is around overrides. So when we talk about overrides, we're talking about county attorney and judicial overrides. So that could be that kids may have an opportunity to be diverted, but for whatever reason, based upon charge or circumstances, there could potentially have been an override in that. When you look at the other side of the scale at our I'm sorry.
And I was going to say the override is they're actually sent to court instead of an opportunity for a diversion program.
So when you look at for our white youth, what you find is that they're more apt to be able to not have an override. There's a difference in the response or the percentage in the response. When you look at detention at intake, you look at that percentage of kids that actually go into the door of our detention centers. And so that to us is the deep end. That's the last place we want our kids to go, if at all possible. And when we look at our kids of color, we see that there's a higher percentage based upon the population of those kids that end up going into detention. And then at the last point of contact is our youthful offender, is actually the worst point of contact for any youth. And that's those kids that could move into our circuit court and be treated as adults. And you really see the scale start to really shift in response based upon our white kids compared to our Black youth in regards to the youthful offender referrals. That's all based upon criteria. They have not been found to be youthful offenders. They have met the criteria to go up to the circuit court to be able to see whether or not they actually are youthful offenders.
And fairly, I want to state also that this data predates the legislation you just passed this last session about youthful offender referrals. We were excited to see that it is discretionary now as opposed to mandatory based on charge. So we felt like that was an excellent policy decision by this body, and thank you for that. I want to stress also that we started looking at this data after the reforms, the Senate Bill 200 reforms, and we started presenting pretty regularly on the data to the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, which Chairman Westerfield also shares. So we really, I think once we had the data, this is when we really first started looking at it. And honestly, I think this is the first time it really probably got our attention in the court system, if that's fair. That was really where the impetus was.
So in 2014, there was a study that came out from U of L, and we just wanted to mention it because it was, at that time, they talked about the language of disproportionate minority contact, and I know that each year it seems like there's a little bit of a change in language, and we're all trying to figure out, how to best talk about the data and be able to reflect what the outcomes are showing. At this point in time, it kind of gave a really broad scope and picture of Kentucky. I think what we have to remember is that we talk about 120 counties, but when you dig deep, you also are looking at really our top 10 counties that typically have what we would call racial and ethnic disparities. And so this study gave us a perspective and a view, and we had been involved in a lot of work around this particular effort back in 2014.
So in 2017, Senator Westerfield made the request to all of the child-serving agencies in an effort to just sort of help address racial and ethnic disparities, would we start voluntarily reporting our data? So we did actually begin doing that in 2017 across the board, at least all the data that we had with respect to education, data collection analysis, local action planning, and ongoing assessment and improvement. And I think Patrick, as he introduced you, is our diversity and inclusion officer, and he's going to, I think, take the next set of slides. Patrick, go ahead.
Absolutely. So really quick, I'm just going to share a couple of the different steps that we've taken to promote diversity and inclusion at the AOC. One of the first things and one of the biggest things that we've done is create a diversity and inclusion statement and policy. And one of the biggest reasons why we created this policy is to let our staff know how important this topic is to us. Through that, we believe that by focusing on inclusion and prioritizing the fact that we want to treat all of our employees equally, we want to make sure that everybody feels respected and valued across the board, along with promoting diversity and increasing our recruitment, we believe it's going to put us in the best position possible to make sure that we're properly serving the diverse populations inside the state of Kentucky. Next slide, please. And along with that, we're actually currently working on a leadership development program. This program will actually give internship opportunities to students at the university, students at Kentucky State University. And through this opportunity, we hope that students will come in, learn more about the judicial branch of state government, and in the future, consider us as an employer. Along with that, in 2019, the Kentucky Court of Justice actually partnered with the Jefferson County Racial and Fairness Commission to do a series of community listening engagement sessions called Court Talks. And through these court talks, we actually had representatives from the KCOJ speak with the public about their positions and what they do within the court system. And we also gave the public an opportunity to voice any concerns that they may have and ask any questions regarding the judicial system. In addition to that, we understand that promoting diversity and inclusion is very important, but we also believe that it's important to celebrate it as well. So in 2020, we created what's called the William E. Mcnulty Award. That award is named after the first African-American Supreme Court justice here in the state of Kentucky. And during our 2020 Black History Month celebration, we actually gave that award to a member of our organization, African-American young woman who has been with our organization for 40 plus years. So I think I'm gonna hand it back to Rachel.
So when we talk about any of these conversations, what we hope that the commission and what we feel, what we'd heard at the last meeting, it seems to be one of the charges is to really look at data and for data to drive the conversation. It has really been for us an opportunity to dig deep into understanding what racial and ethnic disparities look like and understand where they're coming from within our contact points. Very intentional focus has been given for us to really track recidivism, understand what points we may influence, what points we may not influence, and have a better knowledge in just regards to how the system interacts. And we've been able to take that work across the agency. And so Laurie has been very intentional to say we need to move not just within the Family and Juvenile Services and the Court Designated Worker Program, which consists of child welfare and juvenile justice, but to move into pretrial services and also move into specialty courts to really understand what's happening within our systems and be able to work towards impacting that. It's opened up doors around service array and access. It's been able to provide some chances for us to figure out the nuances within communities and to really be able to have some interactive dialogues with our stakeholders.
And one of the things I think we've realized in the courts is that we do a pretty good job of tracking our race data. However, I know that one of the focuses of this commission is economic data as well. So we have some limited ability to capture that. I know Damon Preston from the Department of Public Advocacy is behind me, and he would tell you that probably 95% of the cases, criminal cases in our district and circuit courts in the Commonwealth, DPA is the appointed attorney representing those defendants because they're too poor to afford their own attorney. Appreciate the fact that this committee has expanded beyond just, I think, the race question as well. Because, Rachel, if you go really to the next slide, we're seeing some things start to change in the criminal justice system. And we're seeing particularly, not just in Jefferson County, but statewide, an underutilization of our specialty courts program. That's our Veterans Treatment Court, our drug courts, our mental health courts. And soon we've got a couple of pilots, our family recovery courts as well, that we're hoping, we may see some of those expand. But what we've seen, especially really with, I think there was a lot of positive impacts about House Bill 463 approximately 10 years ago, but one of the things that we have seen since 463, drug court is a tough option. Accepting a probation and referral to drug court is going to be an 18-month, 24-month, sometimes 36-month commitment to treatment and recovery. And a lot of folks aren't going to take that with their first offense or their second offense. And frankly, a specialty courts program really needs to serve the high-risk, high-needs population. So what we were seeing is I could go on way too long about this, but we see very little treatment opportunities for our lower level offenses. But I know, Rachel, if you'll go on really kind of to the next slide, but our Jefferson County program should be much larger than it is. But what we wanted to share with you is some of our race data out of our specialty courts program as well. So what you'll see on this slide is the number of our referrals. Referrals right now are obviously down with COVID. We're working aggressively to try to get our referral numbers into specialty courts up. But of the percent completion, 39% of our white population completed our specialty, received the referrals, and 30% were non-white. But the percent completion in Jefferson County, 50% and 15% non-white. So getting that person from the point that they're actually referred to graduation, we see our numbers decrease pretty significantly. I think one of the things that we want to share, this is not a uniquely Kentucky problem. This is something that's happening in specialty courts programs across the country. In fact, we've got all of our drug court teams right now at the NADCP conference, and all of our judges are texting us about all the new programs that are coming to address drug court specifically, how we recruit more minorities into our specialty courts program. Rachel's going to speak just a minute, I think, about what we see as the barriers to specialty courts.
Yep,
I jumped ahead, sorry.
Well, Lori had mentioned right off the bat, that's a key piece of it. You have to be able to make it available and accessible, and it has to be something that is a better option than to not go to drug court, honestly. People have to be looking to have some sort of more restorative approach, because along with that opportunity comes an opportunity for employment, comes an opportunity for stability, comes an opportunity for support, and we know that for recovery, that's what we're looking for.
And I want to say, too, the large population in our drug court program, and we will have the data on this, they're poor white Kentuckians, and most of them are located in the rural parts of the state. I want to share that. So that's why I think this extra focus in our specialty courts program is key right now, not just on the race piece, but also being able to provide you with the data that you might want with respect to the socioeconomic background of really all of our participants. Because the drug epidemic, as you know, is hitting us everywhere. And it's not hitting us harder in rural Kentucky. I just think sometimes it's more evident in rural Kentucky.
That's true. The other piece that we talk a lot about, and I know that you as legislators are constantly talking about, and that's around weapons and the weapon charges, and the fact that one of the barriers of utilizing drug court for some of our charges is around federal restrictions around eligibility. And so the access piece becomes bigger than just the fact that we may not be able to get to a clientele base because of whatever nuances of the amount of time it may take. It could also be based upon restrictions that we have.
Well, and I want to say, too, these aren't charges in which a weapon was used. We're talking about a charge where a weapon may have been present. It could have been a gun in the car. It could have been a speeding or wanton endangerment charge. But if the possession of the weapon is included, that's an automatic exclusion. And now that's a federal exclusion. That's in all of our grant agreements. Now, the good news is that Congress is right now considering a piece of legislation that would remove that prohibition. As you can imagine, the National Association of Drug Court Professionals is working very, very hard to educate members of Congress about how important that legislation is.
And then it's always on us as a program to make sure that we are educating our stakeholders on the opportunities. It really is a persuasive, it really is an influence in order to get people into drug court, and so really making sure that we increase that and are very transparent about what can be provided, but also what the gaps are in this service array.
Sometimes when you look at our pretrial data, which this is what this slide is, and it's dense, and I'm sorry, because it's one of those things that I'd like to be able to have the time to sort of go through each one of these markers with you individually. You might look at this and conclude that we don't have a race or ethnic disparity program or problem in our pretrial program. I think if you look at the percentages, what you're going to see, you see such a low percentage of African Americans, a higher percentage in our misdemeanor Bs and As and our D felonies. And I don't know this for certain, but we're going to look at it after I saw this slide. I'm pretty sure these are going to be our lower level drug offenses, our shoplifting, the charges that we know are affecting poor Kentuckians. And I think the bulk of our jail population, the vast majority, is right here in these numbers. So what it does is it drives the overall percentages down on the back end of this chart, if that makes sense. I don't know, Rachel, if there's...
Well, the only other piece of it that our data people made sure to lift up is that we are now slowly getting the census information back, the current census, and so this will adjust and adapt based upon what we learn from that information also. But it is important to note that we are looking at that 8%. That's what the numbers where we went by. That first column shows you the overall population that we're comparing in regards to the pretrial cases.
This next slide is probably the slide that, I'm going to be just completely honest, it's probably the slide that bugs me the most in our whole presentation. Because if you'll notice, we don't have national data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics on the pretrial population across the country since 2002. Now, I do know there's a national effort right now with BJA and BJS to increase their data collection on this issue. So we're watching that pretty carefully. The last thing we did have was what our total pretrial population was in this country. And you can sort of see what is a pretty significant explosion from 2002 to 2017. That's directly related to substance use and economic disadvantages across, I think, the country.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And as you can see, you all, we've talked a lot about data up until this point. We actually believe that data greatly helps us improve our organization. So some of the ways that it's helped us improve the organization is by, number one, allowing us to see where we need to experience more growth in terms of our workforce and as it relates to diversity. Outside of that, by looking at the data from specific counties within our state, we've also been able to develop local action plans as well to help better serve those counties and help them with their specific needs. In terms of training, doing implicit bias trainings and cultural awareness trainings, and then issuing out surveys and questionnaires after those trainings has greatly helped us improve the trainings and also has helped us determine how we're looking in terms of like success. And then the last thing I'll share, in terms of being more transparent, we have a web-based juvenile justice data repository that is free for the public to look at. And I'm pretty sure they can actually check that out on our website. Is that correct? Absolutely.
And I want to point out that any of the training material, that you're welcome to any of our training material, if you're just curious what it looks like, you'd like to see it on any of these topic areas that we've listed here, we'd be happy to share any of that with this committee. And then I think our last slide, Patrick.
Yeah. Most definitely. So this is one of, I think, our greatest achievements. This is what we call our Racial and Ethnic Disparities Tool Guide. And we actually created this while we were going about our own journey in terms of combating racial and ethnic disparities within our organization. So if you look closer, you'll see there's like a 4-step model. The first one is just identifying the racial and ethnic disparities that may exist in the organization. The second one is constructing or coming up with a strategic plan to reduce those racial and ethnic disparities. After that, we encourage institutionalizing certain policies and procedures that will help in preventing further racial and ethnic disparities from coming about. And then the last thing that we encourage is just reevaluating all the steps that you've taken up until that point to look for areas of improvement. We followed all of these steps, and we think it can greatly help other organizations combat racial and ethnic disparities.
And the guide is in your material, so you have a copy of that.
So we were longer than 15 minutes, and I apologize. But we're happy to take any questions and happy to actually follow up anytime after this committee also.
Great. I think that Senator Whitney Westerfield has a question. We'll start with him.
Okay, Chairman.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Laurie, Rachel, and Patrick, thank you all for your presentation. If you go about 4 or 5 slides back, if you don't mind, I had a quick question about one of those data points. One right before that one, that's it. So when you're looking at the population obviously jumps up. The one that jumps out at you are the more serious offenses. The more serious, the bigger the number gets. I just had a random question. And I don't know how else to ask this, what's the average age of one of those cases? And I don't mean of the offender, but I mean, your Class D population, there's a lot of churn. You get new Class D folks in, you get Class D folks that work themselves out. Your A's and B's are hanging around for a while. I'm curious how long, when we start seeing change, because when I think about those cases, I think about different points of contact where racial and ethnic disparities can come into play because of human bias and so forth. And I'm wondering how far back, how old on average are these cases that we're looking at this chart in?
We can certainly,
when we're talking about Class A's and B's.
We can certainly look at that. If you're talking about the felony A and B's or the misdemeanor A's and B's.
That felony A and B.
We can certainly get you that data, and you're correct. Those are going to be older. You're right. The churn is happening at the misdemeanor level, and a lot of these felony D's are pleading to the misdemeanor, right? And so we'll have folks on multiple different probations for different charges at any one given time. And we don't have a misdemeanor probation program in this state. And I think it is a huge gap for us, in my opinion, and that would be the opinion of our judges too, because so much of the population is there. So many D felonies plead to the misdemeanor that we're not sure, what that presence might provide for this population, hopefully prevent them from getting deeper into the system. But we will look at our felony A and Bs and tell you the oldest case, the average case, and then sort of what the median is, Chairman, if that's okay. I do want to point out, too, we don't have, for this purpose, distinguished felony weapon. Again, I want to say, that chart right there, you'll see it in the last grouping. That, again, doesn't necessarily mean a weapon was used in the commission of an offense there. It just means it's in the charge. We probably can break that down more for you and give you more granular level of detail on that one, too.
So many of the offenses, and I've got a brief comment I want to make, Madam Chair, if I can, but so many of the offenses, so much of this data, and you all, as you've heard me say privately many times and publicly, I know I've said it before as well, you all, the AOC has the best data and is certainly the most eye-opening data of any sector of state government. But that very example is a point where I wish we could do better, and I'm not sure how to fix it, because there's not always a really simple fix for gathering it, because you've got pretrial services folks and you've got your clerks. But whether or not you're using this UOR number or this number on the indictment here or there doesn't always capture, like you just said, whether or not the firearm was actually discharged, whether or not there was a human victim, whether or not it was just property. Sometimes the charge tells you that, sometimes it doesn't. And some of that is pretty helpful information when we're making policy decisions. But let me just say this, and then I'll shut up. I want to praise AOC. In the several years that I've been working on this, and there are certainly people who've been working a lot longer than I have been, who've been working on racial and ethnic disparity issues and disproportionate minority contact issues since long before I knew the term. But since I've been working on it, there is no branch of state government, no office or agency who has worked harder and more diligently and volunteered more to do things without a legislative mandate and, frankly, without budget allocation than the administrative office of the courts. And the two ladies there at the table are the reason for that. I can't heap enough praise on Director Dudgeon and Rachel Bingham for the work that they've done, for the passion that they have for it, and the desire they have to make a difference, even when the legislature doesn't force them to do it, and we don't give them the money to do it, but they've done it anyway. They've done it because they appreciate the importance of the work. And I know that they'd be the first to tell you that there's a lot of work left to do, but in my book, they're at the top of the list for the dedication they've shown to try to make a difference. So thank you for that.
Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think our job is to get you the data. I think that's our job. And I think, obviously, it's your job to tell us what the policy is and how you want us to manage it and do with it and what you want us to do with that. I want us to continue to do a better job. I really wanted to ask Chairwoman Jones from the Parole Board how they collect their race data. For example, do they self-identify? Once they're in the correction system, I don't know. So much of our race data comes from a charge or an early citation, and it's the observance of a law enforcement officer what someone's race or ethnicity may be. I don't know. I have lots of questions about how we can continue to do that part of our job better. I think we're going to need that as we move forward in this. But again, I'm happy to take any questions, any follow-up material you'd like to see. We'd love to share. Chairman, thank you.
Chairman Givens.
Great presentation. Well done. Thank you. And Director Dudgeon, your last statement prompts me to ask this as a non-attorney. And so I always ask for grace as a non-attorney in a room full of attorneys. But the handoff of data, you mentioned the parole system and the corrections system, and data's got to drive what we do. Is there a data handoff that happens as the court system moves to the correction system that moves to the parole system? And if not, what do we need to do to help address that?
So I suspect Chairman Westerfield is unmuting about right now. I don't know. So we are all very siloed in our data collection efforts. That is a very, very good question. And I think, we have our data at the time.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're very siloed?
Well,
is that
we're siloed from corrections.
Okay.
We're siloed from the Department of Juvenile Justice. We're siloed from the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. We're siloed from DPA. So we have data sharing agreements, by the way, with corrections, DJJ, DPA. So we're transmitting this data to each other, but for different reasons around confidentiality, our systems don't connect, but we can do a better job of sharing this kind of data because corrections is going to pick up their data at the point of sentencing. So, remember the misdemeanor population or any of the D felonies, that's jail data. That is a whole untapped set of data and data that I'm not sure is easily accessible, by the way. Corrections data is going to pick up at the time of sentencing. They really aren't ours unless they're sentenced to a specialty court program, if that makes sense. And certainly none of the parole data would ever.
There could be, if I may, Mr. Chairman, there could be an enormous improvement in the flow of information between these different agencies. That presents a host of problems. We have tried addressing that in prior legislation in Senate Bill 200. We tried to address some of that. And I think there's an example that comes to mind. Even if all the information was shared, not every agency, I've learned recently that even though AOC is sending data to certain agencies in the executive branch on a regular basis and has been for, in some instances, years, no one at that particular executive branch agency knows what to do with it. So there's a lot of improvements that have to be done there so that we even know what the problem is and the scope of the problem.
Well, and we've just talked really about the criminal context today. I mean, it's a small percentage of really, I think, the questions or the things possibly for this committee to look at when you look at, say, DCBS, behavioral health, Medicaid. There are a number of other places to look, I think, outside of criminal and really the court system. We just happen to be, I think, we've just been working on this for a little while.
Quick follow-up. Can I do one quick follow-up? We could go on. I've got Chairman Westerfield and Director Dudgeon. Thank you for the response. Lots of questions percolate once we start this sort of conversation. Too many for us to continue in this brief time period we have. But Ms. Bingham, if you would, back up to one of your very early slides that the Director indicated. This is the graph slide, and you've got the 2020 numbers up, I think, on the slide. The indication was that this was sort of the light bulb moment when you saw the disparities, that slide. That's your 21 slide. I presume you would have a 14 and a 15 and a 16 in those slides. My first question is, share with us what trends you see over time, if you do see trends over time. Are you getting better as a system? Is the slide becoming more what you would expect it to be?
Yes, go ahead.
So I think a couple of the trends we see automatically is we may have addressed to some degree in the juvenile justice world, and this is where this slide is sitting, around what we consider to be disproportionality. And so could we possibly have the charges, the cases, the complaints that we're supposed to have, where we're supposed to have, and we've dropped the number. So we've seen a huge drop in the overall number of kids that are coming into the court system that are getting a positive outcome, which is diversion if they have contact with us. And so we see that as a positive. We've dropped those numbers. We've lifted up diversion. We've lifted up a better outcome. What we now have to move to look at is disparity. Are kids that are coming before the court or are involved in the deeper end of the system where these outcomes are worse and harsher, and we see more Black youth in that category, are they being treated equitably? Is there an equal response to, for example, if it's a white youth with the same charge in the same situation, are we being disparate in our responses?
So Rachel, real quick too, can you speak just a little bit about a couple of the programs or projects we're doing, especially the Christian County program? So what's the response to that? So when we see this kind of disparity, what are we, the courts, doing? So will you speak to Christian County especially?
Sure. Christian County is a great example. So we sat down with the Christian County District Court judge. We sat down with the prosecutor, the school systems there.
Law
enforcement's there. We also have the court designated worker staff there. And we talked about this data, these contact points right here. And we actually dig deep into that data. So we peel it apart. We look at how those kids are coming through and what our response is. That work's been going on for close to 5 years. And the growth out of that work are things like more of a trauma-informed response by the school systems. The school systems are active members in that team. They have built in a racial equity committee and racial equity work based upon just us having monthly conversations and talking about data and figuring out better outcomes. That's just one example.
And I think another reason the data is so important, because if you think, and when we called, let's say, some of our judges in another county after this, can we just come talk to you about your data? There's an immediate concern that we're coming in some sort of accusatory way. And we're not. We just want to show you the data. And I think the data is so eye-opening for everybody, because I don't think there's ever been a statement that this is an intentional choice by any of the stakeholders in this system at all. But then we see, and then you start asking the why after you look at the data. And that's all we're trying to do in these conversations, is ask the why after you look at the data. And then the community sort of grabs this issue and takes it. And our role is not, our local CDWs have a role. But at that point, we're just trying to get the conversation to happen.
And oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think your point's beautifully made, and I think the word you keep saying over and over, Ms. Bingham, is the data. Mm-hmm. The data then identifies the outliers that make you say, hey, Christian County, relative to the rest of the state, you've got something a little odd going on here, and it not only pinpoints the outlier, but it also gives you a segue to go to that group and say, something's just not, maybe our data's wrong, help us to make sure our data. But it creates a door for you to open, to start a conversation, which causes people to reflect. So,
absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you.
Senator Berg.
Thank you. Thank you for an amazing presentation. And I am somewhat new to this. And again, I am not a lawyer. But if you had in your mind, having gone over, what looks to me to be several years of quality data, is there an inflection point? Are we arresting children more frequently if they're African American than if they're Caucasian? Is the problem actually, is there one point that we can see is making that we can impact easily? Is there low-hanging fruit, I guess, is the question.
Well, and I think we really are trying to address that through a really equitable access to diversion. We're trying to make sure everybody within the same charge has the same access to participate in a diversion program and not go to court. I think that's really the inflection point for everyone. Don't think that any of us are probably qualified to ask the other part or answer the other part of your question. We really have to break it down by charge and look at what's happening by charge in each jurisdiction.
And then the diversion-making process or the decision, is that the judge, or is that somewhere before the judge in the court system?
You guys have actually done a lot of that. A lot of these cases are now mandatorily diverted, so thank you for that.
Yeah, there is a statutory requirement. And then there is a criteria that is utilized. If it comes to status cases, the criteria fits for our court-designated workers to be able to have some flexibility on whether or not those kids can go through diversion. If it's a public offense, we consult with the county attorney.
Well, and you may want to remind everybody the difference between a status and a public, because this is...
So status cases are things like habitual truancy, beyond control of parent, beyond control of school, runaway. Public offense are things like theft, assault, things like that.
A status offense wouldn't be a crime, but for the fact that you're a juvenile, if that makes sense.
Got you. All right. So when these children get into the system and we're diverting Caucasian children at a significantly higher rate than African American children, is that because of the crimes they're being charged with at the beginning, then, that basically because they're being charged with higher level crimes, we're not able to divert them?
So that's a complex, that's where the data
Right.
is so valuable. I could sit down with you for 2 hours and talk about our performance measures, because that's where the conversation happens. What's the next layer to peel back? What else do you want to know? That's what the senator has engaged us in for the last 5 years. That constant asking questions about the data. So what is it about that point? I can actually show you different points of how kids are coming through the system, and whether or not it is because of charge, or whether or not it is because of a discretionary point, or what that might look like based upon whatever point of contact we have in the juvenile justice. We need to be able to do the same thing at the contact points in pretrial and at the contact points in specialty courts, which is what we're now building to do.
Awesome. Well, I can only, first of all, thank Senator Westerfield for caring about this, as we all should, and thank you guys tremendously for what obviously shows that you care and that you're working and that this matters to you. I can share, my personal experiences with family members is, if you're a young white girl, you can go out there and brandish a gun at somebody, you're not getting arrested. And it's the truth. And there seems to be a bias as to, whether we're better off giving this child a warning and letting them go, or when they don't deserve a warning and shouldn't be let go, but it's still happening. And then other children that we seem to be grabbing into the system at the first opportunity. So that's just my comment.
Thank you, Senator Berg. We're going to finish up with one last question. We want to be respectful of our next presenter, Dr. Thompson. We're so glad he's able to join us today. So Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be quick. Thank you so much. I want to commend you all. I want to commend Senator Westerfield for prioritizing the collection of this huge amount of data over the years so that we can, at this point, discuss evidence-based solutions to what are really systemic issues in our society. Very quickly, I was curious. Kentucky has the highest, if not one of the highest, rates of incarceration for women. This is a little outside the scope, but I was curious about the breakdown, racial and ethnic breakdown of women who are incarcerated, and where they would fall, in the spectrum of misdemeanors or felonies and the like.
So we could certainly give you that data by gender to the extent we have it. Again, with respect to who's sentenced to corrections, that would be correction data. But anything misdemeanor level or up to the point of sentencing, we're going to have that by case. So we can absolutely share that. We'd be happy to.
Then one quick follow-up. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
I did also, and this is probably directed actually to the chairs, are we able to get the jail level data and the corrections level data? I'm curious about the foreign-born population and the impact 287G agreements, these federal agreements where you have transfers between jails to prisons, what the impact is on that. And then third and last question, Jefferson County deprioritized possession of cannabis, did not decriminalize it. I was wondering if there was any impact in the numbers that you've seen since 2019 once that took effect. And you don't have to answer that right now. This is all just stuff you can get back to me on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'm now going to turn it over to Chairman Givens to finish up the meeting. Thank you all so much for coming and spending your time with us this afternoon.
To our AOC guests, thank you very much for being here. And certainly this, as members of the committee have heard the presentation, this may end up being an appetizer for us to have them back for other questions. I get tired of us using the phrase deeper dive, but maybe that's what we intend to do at some point with the rich data sets that they've got. So thank you all very much. Speaking of rich data sets, we are honored to have joining us now President Aaron Thompson with CPE. And President Thompson, we're glad to have you here, and you are our presenter. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Senator Givens. Good to see everybody. I have to tell you, as a sociologist, I enjoyed the last presentation, and I appreciate the focus on data. I appreciate the conversation about being very transparent about the data. I will be remiss as the head of higher education if I didn't say that the issues you dealt with the last presentation could be solved by higher education. If you look at the data, and we do, as Senator can tell you, I look at data at levels that I feel very comfortable with, and I'm proud to be very transparent about it. But the solution to a lot of this is this educated workforce. A solution to, if you look at the numbers, those that are on unemployment, those that are in jail, those that are in prison, those that get sentenced more in a disparate way than others. If you look at SNAP, if you look at all of those, you'll see the role higher education plays. So I would be remiss if I didn't make that statement. So as a reference point, as we put up this, I want to give you at least my definition of some of the ways that we're going to be talking about performance funding and other items today. We've heard a lot of conversations about what equity is, what inclusion is, what diversity is. And I will tell you how we use it at CPE and higher education as a way of helping you to understand the operational definition for the rest of this presentation. And I call it being invited to the dance or having a dance. And if you have a dance, like we do in higher education to provide what we need for the workforce and for the economy, we need to invite everybody to the dance. That's diversity. That doesn't mean, though, that they're invited to dance. So the other item is making sure that they're invited to dance. And that's not leaving anyone out of the dance. I mean, that means that if we have people inside of our box, if you will, we have to ask them to be learners with us. And that's inclusion. And some of you know that Senator Givens, he doesn't dance as well as I do. So he may need more lessons than me. And what that is equity, the ability to look at where the student is at and provide him or her with those needed items to get them to a point of where they can participate, where they can honestly participate and be a person that adds to our society, and in many cases, not have to face the criminal justice system. So as we think about this, and Bruce, move to the next slide, in higher education, we set a goal of having 60% of our workforce with a credential or higher by 2030. Now, this is an important piece because we've connected this with what we consider to be a thriving workforce, a thriving economy. We're not connecting it with just getting by. We know that with our data, and happy to share any data you want to know about, we know this is the case. So 60 to 30 is our North Star, and that's what we've concentrated on. And since I've been in this role, we've doubled down on that North Star in all the things that we are presenting to our campuses and what we're asking them to do, and the assessment process that we use to make sure we understand how well they are doing all of those to impact that workforce. Next slide, please. And I should have told you, I have a collection of crew with me from Dr. Bill Payne, Travis Powell, Dawn Offit, who's our Chief Diversity Officer. Most of you know Bill as our CFO and know Travis as our Vice President of all things, but also our legal counsel. So when we look at where we're at, when we started this process, we can see that we needed about a 1.7 percentage point increase every year. And if you look at this blue line, that's the required growth. We are now above that line, almost double to what we need, and we're proud of that. Now, that's a variety of degrees and credentials to make that line be above the required line. Next slide, please. So we look at this trilogy as a way of thinking about what we have to do to make sure that all of our students, that we invite them to the dance, we include them in the dance, we get them through the dance. And I have to tell you that the performance funding model was the last key to this. But we also had to make it a part of our overall strategic agenda. So we've matched up our diversity policy and our strategic agenda with those performance funding metrics, and asking our campuses to put this into their strategic plan. And that's what we measure, because you measure what's important. And so that's the way we see this. So we have incentives, and we have, sometimes items that people wouldn't consider incentives to help us to make sure that we are putting those inputs in that we need. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I know you all are a little bit behind. So please stop me at any time. So all of our campuses focus heavily on these items, and they measure what they need to measure. And I'll be very honest with you that a stick that we have is like with our diversity policy. And once again, these are lined up. If they don't do that, they get no new programs. If they don't achieve what they put in their plans that we approve, then there's no new programs. And you well know with our performance funding model is that if they don't perform with these metrics that we have, they get no money. And so I do want to appreciate Senator Givens for really just a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with us and our leaders in higher education to create the second edition of this model that has helped many of our campuses to not fall off that fiscal cliff that we've talked about in the past. Next slide, please. So this is what you have, and I'm going to let Bill jump in here quickly and just talk about how we use the performance formula to distribute the money that the state gives us.
Thank you, President Thompson. Members of the commission, good afternoon. My name is Bill Payne. The slide that you're looking at on the left-hand side, the pie chart, it shows the 5 major funding components included in the university funding model, but we have those same 5 funding components in the KCTCS model. And so some of you I know already know that we have 2 models, others maybe not, but there's a university funding model and one for KCTCS. You can see that 35% is dedicated to 2 components, student success and course completion. And then 10% of the state appropriation that supports the operations of our campuses, 10% is allocated to maintenance and operations, 10% to institutional support, and 10% to academic support. Now, each institution's share of whatever they produce determines what their distribution will be from each of these funding pools that are these 5 major components. For example, in terms of course completion, the allocation is based on each institution's share of sector total credit hours earned. Academic support, the allocation is based on each institution's share of full-time equivalent enrollment. Institutional support is based on each institution's share of sector total spending on instruction and student services. But what I really want to focus on today is the orange slice, the 35% that's dedicated to student success. Those funds are allocated based on each institution's share of student success outcomes produced. And you can see those student success outcomes listed there: degrees and credentials awarded, degrees per 100 full-time equivalent enrollment, STEM plus H degrees, degrees earned by minority and low-income students, and student progression. Now, as we worked with Senator Givens and the Post-Secondary Education Working Group to develop this model, every campus president was involved, several members of the General Assembly, a representative from the governor's office. We came up with a list of goals that we wanted the campuses to focus on, and those are listed over to the right. We wanted them to focus on increasing retention and timely completion. We wanted them to grow the number of undergraduate degrees and credentials produced. We wanted to close those opportunity gaps that President Thompson is talking about by increasing degrees and credentials earned by minority, low-income, and underprepared students. And then lastly, we wanted our institutions to produce more degrees and credentials in fields that garner higher wages upon completion, such as STEM plus H. Next slide, please.
And Bill, before you talk about this slide, I do want to give you the definition we use for opportunity gaps. In other words, we can close achievement gaps by collapsing the top performers and help those who are struggling to get there. And you can close it that way. Well, we argue that the 60 by 30 is the North Star. So we're measuring everything to that. We're measuring how many people are left behind, how far they are behind, and what we need to do to have those inputs to actually get us to a point of where everybody's raising themselves to that opportunity. What you'll find in this performance funding model, it focuses heavily on those opportunity gaps. It just doesn't campuses just can't perform in just getting degrees alone. They have to help those that historically been disenfranchised from those credentials. And that will take more input. That's equity. That will take more items than they've concentrated on possibly before. And we'll give you some examples of that later on. But when we look at this chart, I want you to understand that this is the way that we've used this model, and you'll see in a minute how well it's worked, to make sure that we do that. Once again, connect this with healthcare, connect it with criminal justice system, connect it with all of those elements that I argue higher education is a solution to. Bill.
What this table is showing on the left-hand side of the slide are the premiums that are included in the funding model for minority, low income, and STEM plus H degree production. These numbers change from year to year as you run the performance funding model, because the size of the pool can change slightly, the size of the number of degrees produced can change slightly. But this is the most recent iteration of the performance funding model for 2021-22. And working with Senator Givens and Representative Tipton and the State Budget Director Chilton, along with the campus presidents, we have developed what we think is one of the largest premiums or incentives, if you will, for our institutions to enroll, progress, and get to the finish line. Underrepresented minority students and low-income students, and the same is true of STEM plus H bachelor's degrees. But I'll take just a moment to explain how this works. The first column of numbers that you see are the allocation percentages. And out of that 35% that I mentioned earlier, 20% of the student success outcomes pool is dedicated to degree production. 9% for bachelor's degrees, 3% for minority bachelor's degrees, 3% for low-income bachelor's degrees, 5% for STEM plus H. If you apply those percentages to the amount of funding that was available, it was about $850 million minus mandated programs for this most recent iteration of the funding model. The total size of the degree production pool was about $106 million. You can see that at the bottom of that second column of numbers. So based on those allocation percentages, you can see that these are not small dollars. We've got a $47.7 million bachelor's degree pool, $15.9 million for minority bachelors, low income bachelors, $26.5 million for STEM plus H. Well, what happens within the model, since each institution earns their share of what they produce, you divide those pools by the number of weighted degrees for each type of degree. So there were 24,706 weighted bachelor's degrees produced in 2021-22, 2,872 minority bachelor's degrees produced. By dividing the size of the pool by the weighted degrees, we get the state funding per degree. So for a bachelor's degree earned in 2021-22, the state funding per degree, if it was not a URM bachelor's degree, not low income, not STEM plus H, was $1,932. If the student that earned that degree happened to be an underrepresented minority, an additional $5,540 was added to that $1,932. So the total premium for producing an underrepresented minority degree was $7,472. And this is what I was talking about a minute ago. This is a very large financial incentive for our institutions to enroll, retain, and graduate underrepresented minority students. For the low-income student population, the subsidy per degree is $1,379 in 2021-22. And for STEM plus H degrees, it's $3,204. If you look at the chart to the right, I did want to make sure that I was clear on this point. These premiums are cumulative. So that first blue bar showing $1,932 per bachelor's degree produced, that's what an institution would have earned in 2021-22 had they produced a bachelor's degree that was non-URM, non-low income, and non-STEM plus H. If the degree was earned by a minority student, you not only get the $1,932, you get that additional $5,540. So the total premium grows to $7,472. If the bachelor's degree is earned by an underrepresented minority student who also happens to be low income, the premium grows to $8,851 per degree produced. And if a low income underrepresented minority achieves a bachelor's degree in a STEM plus H field, it's over $12,000 per STEM plus H low income URM degree produced. So those are very hefty premiums that are, leading the progress that we're making that President Thompson is about to show you. And I'm going to turn it back over to President Thompson.
Thank you, Bill. Next slide, please. Next slide. So let me put it in perspective. Kentucky has about 50% of their high school graduating seniors going to college. We've got to do better than that. There's no way we can build this economy I mentioned with that level of college going. We also have many adult learners not engaging in college. So obviously it's going to be a huge focus. We have many in certain areas of our state are not completing at the rates that they need to. So when we look at this overview of enrollment, what you'll see, and I want you to see the line, we went back to 2011-12. We wanted to show you a trajectory from that, but you'll also see the line of 2016-17 when we made the strategic agenda, the diversity policy, and the performance funding model. We knew that we had to have these working in unison to kind of push the envelope. So a lot of the data, a lot of the increases you're going to see are coming from that period of time. But as you can see, we are down almost 16% in enrollment. And that's an important piece, mainly on the front end. We've done better in keeping students. Those are those outcome measures that we talk about. But the area I want to point out clearly to you that we're up. The only population group we're up in is our underrepresented minority. So we're down 16% in overall population, and we're up 6.4%. So obviously we need to focus on this more than ever. And you've seen the data, you know the demographics. This is going to continue to grow. So have that in mind as we go through the next few slides. Next one, please. So if you look at this, what you'll find is that when we look at all students, we need to really increase all of our students, obviously, to come in and get through, but just take a look at this. In our overall, we had from 2012, 2019, that much of a numerical decrease. If you look at all URM students at our public universities that are undergraduate, we were up 23%. If we look at those URM but not low income, that's 52%, and URM that's low income is about 2%. So we're getting more people of varied background and economic inputs coming into our campuses. If you look at KCTCS, this is an area we have concern in drop in enrollment, no doubt, but the area that they have increased in is the URM non-low income students, partially because we've been focusing heavily on affordability and that pipeline from into KCTCS and to our four-year institutions with transfer. Next slide, please. So this is a really good slide. I've been in higher education for a long time, been in Kentucky a long time. I always said if we can ever get our institutions at 80% retention, we would be kicking butt. We are there now in our four-year institutions, and I feel great about that. But if you look at where we've come, you see that we are closing the gaps in our retention area. We're, first of all, increasing everybody's retention, but we're closing gaps tremendously. If you look at all URM students, up 13.2 percentage points, not percent, but percentage points. Although we're up 8 percentage points in overall retention. For those who are into student success and knows how this works, if you would know, it's hard to move retention, and that's from full-time first year to full-time second year of the same cohort, just to let you know that measurement. But we're up in all those categories that we mentioned, low-income students that are URM and non-low income that are URM. If you look at KCTCS, you see that they're doing almost equally as well, except they are down in URM low-income students. Now, this is a worry for me because overall, we're not doing as well on low income as we need to. So the law performance funding bill has charged us with looking at what needs to be changed down the road. And you can get where I'm going to go and recommending what I think we need to do to enhance what we're trying to accomplish here. Next slide, please. So what we have here on this, if you look at 6-year graduation rates, very proud to say that we have moved tremendously in this area. We're up overall 8.8 percentage points, but our URM we're up 10 percentage points. And those that we're having to affect the low income URMs are up 3 percentage points. So that's really good news. Once again, a gap closing. And I would argue that Kentucky is closing gaps now in higher ed faster than any other state from our baseline. If you look at KCTCS, the same indication that they are doing a great job also in that area, except for URM low income students. And that tells us that we may need more equity inputs in those particular areas. Next slide, please. Now, what we know is that we had to focus heavily on short-term credentials to get people in the workforce. We also had to focus on more baccalaureate degrees that has shown sustainability for the economy. So if you look at the overall items, and I just want you to focus from 2016-17 at just how well we've done. But overall, we're up 30.6% for all of our students as far as degree attainment and credential attainment. We have doubled that for our URM. I mean, if you take a second to think about that, just how much that is, and if we continue at this rate, we may be one of the first states to totally close all the achievement and opportunity gaps. Next slide, please. Same thing you hear at our degrees from our universities. When you look at overall, we're up 18% with our baccalaureate degrees. URM students are up 75%. The URM that's not low income, up 106%, and URM low income students up 59%. So once again, these are indicators that the performance funding and those other inputs are working exactly and better in many cases than I expected, as it should. The STEM-H, same way. This is an area where we had to increase more healthcare folk getting in the, I'm the chair of Baptist Health, and I tell you, we can still hire, 750 more nurses if we had them. But our STEM area as a whole will help us to think about the economy that we need to build. And you see in this case, we're up 48%, overall up 148% for our URM students. And you can see even as we break it down. So the non-low income URM students, as many students who already have some background that doesn't locate itself in low income, may have had parents with more education. So we are going to see more students ready to come in and do college than those historically from a low income category. Next slide, please. KCTCS, you're going to see very similar numbers. Now, I won't read them all to you because you can see them, but really impressive. These are the things that they're working on to get people in the workforce fairly fast. These are the items that will quickly affect your unemployment numbers, right? These are the items that will quickly affect your criminal justice system numbers. So KCTCS, once again, providing mainly short-term credentials in some cases, but also transfer degrees and 2-year technical degrees. Next slide, please. And I'm going to let Travis and Dawn talk to us a little bit about what some of the behavioral changes that we've done, looked at. These are only a drop in the bucket. We could go all day long. And then Senator Givens, we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take it from here. So as you see on our slide, that overall, in terms of our institutions, they're doing a lot to facilitate change and progress. And so these are some general items that institutions are doing across the board. So if you look at number one, in general, they're taking a more holistic approach to how they look at student success. And they are bringing in different teams on their campuses to be able to focus on how they look at their data and specifically how they're looking at predictive analytics. They're also focusing on improving and making sure that they are pinpointing specific recruiting practices to focus on those URM and low income students. They are working with different organizations for outreach to increase the activities within these particular demographics and populations. They are looking at their financial aid from going from merit to need-based and focusing on unmet need. They are looking at certain high-impact practices that I'll get to in just a moment to give you a few examples. They are focusing on that transition to post-secondary through the lens of academic readiness, looking at bridge programming and early intervention strategies. They are increasing their focus on advising at all levels, and they're also looking at training their faculty and staff or providing professional development and learning opportunities within the concept of cultural competency. So a few examples that we have with that, you'll look at, for example, the University of Kentucky. They have their LEADS project, and that particular project uses predictive analytics, and it ties institutional aid funds to required financial counseling. And that in and of itself builds and encourages the financial literacy of their students. At Henderson Community College and Madisonville Community College, they've created some extraordinary mentoring programs that help support the academic success for their African-American male students. At Jefferson Community and Technical College, they have a Rise Together initiative, and that particular initiative focuses on African-American students from low-income neighborhoods around the Louisville area. At Northern Kentucky University, they've created micro grants and scholarships, and those help to offset those tuition and fees for students that can't pay the remaining balances on their accounts. Western Kentucky University has their Intercultural Student Engagement Center Academy, and that uses a living learning community model that supports their students on a social level. Kentucky State University has their pre-college academy, and it's geared toward low-income first-generation students and their URM students with workshops on effective study habits and an opportunity to earn up to 9 credit hours in advising and mentoring. Owensboro Community and Technical College has success coaches that specifically are working in their arts and sciences program to assist the students. And then at CPE, we are in the process of piloting our cultural competency certification initiative with our campuses on this that will be coming up this fall. So we're really excited about that. So again, overall, our institutions have certain programs that they're using to facilitate this change and progress and to address, to not only continue in the trajectory that we're going with increasing those numbers, but also to meet the needs of those numbers where we're falling a little bit short. So at this point, Dr. Thompson, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dawn. And I would be remiss to say that, and I know Senator Givens knows this, CPE has put in a lot of policies to help this along, all right? One is when I took over, we became a minimum test optional state. We also, we outlawed all developmental education courses for 0 credit hours. And KCTCS has one, but our 4-year campuses couldn't do that anymore. So we literally saw many of our low-income students and students of color going from about a 30% success rate to about a 70% success rate, and because they can do it. But we also require that they have those inputs. So the campuses created supplemental instructions for all of these classes. Those are inputs. They created mentoring, formal mentoring programs. We, CPE, provided money to do bridge programming for those that are coming in from high school. And you know the data in high school of students that are graduating and where the disparities are and where the gaps are. So this is the case. Now, I would be remiss if I said we are only giving you public education data here because that's where the performance funding lies. But our private institutions are also focused heavily on a lot of our policies. So I do want to give them a hand clap also. They don't have to follow our instructions as well as much as public education, but they're buying into this philosophy also and learning. So the higher education system as a whole, I think, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair, that we are focused on how we can have those outcomes that we feel both quantitatively is good for the state and qualitatively good for the state and the students. So, sir, I'll be happy to take, or my team will be happy to take any questions you may have.
President Thompson, as always, well done. Thank you, and thank your team very much for the presentation. Our first question or comment is going to be from Ricky Jones online. Mr. Jones, are you on with us?
Yes, I am.
Please proceed, sir.
Right. For as a point of information, I'm Dr. Ricky Jones. I'm the chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville, and I appreciate Dr. Thompson, who I think has done yeoman work in trying to turn higher ed around, from his office. But I would caution us after looking at some of the quantitative analysis from this report to not ignore some of the dark consequences of performance-based funding and what's happening on the ground in higher education. As a department chair, I'm seeing this quite frequently, and we are just starting to get hit, certainly financially, with what's happening in performance, with performance, the performance-based model. What that's translated to for us at the departmental level, where we're responsible, for the education of our students, is a model that is almost completely driven by credit hour production. And that's problematic on a number of levels. One, when you talk about contradictorily issues of diversity, you may not know this, but the University of Louisville, so Kentucky, has one of the oldest Black studies departments in the country. Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville was founded in 1973. We had a revenue generating model that started in 2003 based on distance education that was yielding, after we paid all of our bills, anywhere from $150,000 to $275,000 a year in discretionary money that we could use for ex-pay for faculty, internal scholarships for students, travel for faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates to professional conferences where they could engage in research and meet people in the field, enrichment programs, speakers, all of these things. Other research has shown by Dr. Tamara Adams specifically, who's now the Dean of Undergraduate Studies at Spalding University, that Black students who take Pan-African Studies classes at U of L have a higher rate of persistence at the college level. With the performance-based model now in place, we went from commanding $150,000 and up to do this programming within our department to this year only $33,000. So we don't know exactly how that's working, but it's tough. Also on the STEM side, I would caution people about the overemphasis on STEM because the deleterious effect that that's having is in the humanities, arts, and sciences, which is not just about graduating people who get in jobs, but also making good, critically thinking citizens. At U of L, we now, just last week, eliminated the major in the humanities at our school because people didn't think that there were enough majors in that area. So the people in humanities don't know what's going to happen to that unit over time because the focus isn't on that. So that's the kind of dark side of it. So I would encourage people who are looking at the performance-based model to not lean so much on the quantitative analysis and get on the ground and look at value-added programs. So it's really ironic that if we have something that is going to increase the experience for Black students in particular, but other minorities, that the Black Studies department, in effect, is getting damaged through use of that model. And so that's tough. It's good to hear that we've seen these incredible jumps in persistence and graduation among minority students, because that's important. But I haven't seen those jumps, at least not at my university. So hopefully we can dig back into those numbers, and I'm wrong about it, but I haven't seen it to date. And lastly, I'm totally open to helping out anybody who wants to look at, again, what's really happening on the ground and how the performance-based model does have a very negative side of it for us, the way at least in the way that it's being implemented. I think there needs to be more nuance. Thank you so much for your time.
Chair Givens, I'd like to respond a little bit to that. I would say Dr. Jones hit a couple things on the head that I actually agree with. Not that he's surprised that I would, but we have to think about the qualitative elements our next go around here. That's an important piece. And as Dawn and Travis can tell you, that when we look at best practice for helping students, especially Black students in particular, and Latinx students, it will be programs like Dr. Jones. It will be programs that focuses heavily on building what they consider to be a place they don't have to have an immigrant experience. And that's what many of the students feel coming in. So I, by no means am I one of those people. I'm a sociologist, right? I mean, by no means, I'm one of those people that don't understand that you have to have quality understanding as well as quantifiable understanding. Some things you can't fully measure quantitatively. And I think Dr. Jones' statement is absolutely a valuable statement for us to think about, Senator Givens, as we pick up this conversation down the road. Now, I will tell you, some of our campuses are feeding heavily our Black Studies programs. I mean, so, I don't know everything that goes on each individual campus, but I would argue that some campuses have built those programs, as Dawn can tell you. Put money into those as best practice, especially through our diversity policy. Dawn, I don't know if you want to speak to that or not.
So as we know, each of our individual campuses has the opportunity to look at which strategies they want to implement in terms of our diversity policy. And so I don't have them pulled up specifically in front of me, but I can get that information, of course, to Dr. Jones and anyone else that has it that specifically speaks to those that have put that emphasis in those departments.
And Dawn, I want to say that I have full faith in you. I have full faith in Dr. Thompson as well. And I know a lot of money has been put into building Black Studies at UK. I think that's great. I got my PhD at UK, where good brother George Brown mentored me there. So this is certainly not an attack. It is just a point of information, because if we're measuring everything on credit hours produced and majors, a department like mine, we teach Black Studies in Kentucky. We're never going to win that game. So, I just think it's important that we note that. And I look forward to working with everybody, as Dr. Thompson said, on dealing with the nuance of what we're trying to accomplish and not just getting caught up in a one-sided model. Thank you all so much.
Dr. Jones, thank you. Our next question is Representative Kilcarney.
Thank you. This is another two-part question and probably a request for more breakdown of the data. I was curious to know whether underrepresented minority non-low-income students included the international student population. And the reason I asked that is because there's a special emphasis in your presentation on STEM plus H, which are, specified industries, I guess, that are in high demand. I'm curious about that because the majority nationwide and in Kentucky of STEM students are foreign born, the vast majority. And so I was just curious where they fit into these numbers. And then the second question I had, with your indulgence, is about refugees specifically and their access to education. So this is a population that is consistently and chronically underemployed in Kentucky and nationwide because they didn't have the luxury of packing up degrees and credentials and things like that when they had to flee their country. Where are we in terms of helping them get whatever degree they need to complete the degree to get them employed, again, as engineers or physicians, and again, this is getting back to these high demand industries, and I'm also curious to know which of those have been identified. Thank you.
Well, you ask a lot of good questions. I won't be able to give you all those data at this time. I will tell you that underrepresented minority is a federal designation that talks about historically disenfranchised people from the U.S. So if that kind of helps answer the definition of that. Now, we do count, in fact, our international students that is a part of our diversity policy. We also look at, we have some institutions in the state like Bluegrass Community and Technical College, Jefferson Community and Technical College are working with refugees and others to put them in a program that helps them get into the workforce quicker. And this is an item I think is another conversation another time, because over the last many years, we've seen international students actually decrease coming to the U.S., as you know. One other point that I'll make is that when we look at some of what I thought I heard in your questions, there are many people, as an example, someone from India with a medical degree, there are standards that goes with accreditation, whether or not that degree can be used in the same fashion it was used in India. That's an example, right? So, and some of those may be refugees, or not that's from India, but I'm using that as an example. So that goes beyond, that goes to disciplinary accreditation, that goes to a variety of other items that we look at with those accrediting bodies to see how we cut down on barriers, for lack of a better phrase. But several of our institutions are focused heavily on those. EKU is a great example of someone that really stepped up over the last many years in this area also.
Anything else, Representative? Okay, very good. Anyone else have any questions for this presenter? Senator Berg,
Yes.
Briefly, please.
Thank you, sir. Briefly, on page 10, looking at this data, when we look at all low-income students, down 38.5%, whereas underrepresented minority low-income students are down 29%. And that's the only place that I can actually find in the presentation where we're comparing all low-income students to underrepresented minority low-income students, because it almost seems to me that this data is screaming at me, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, that the less wealth you have to begin with, the more likely you are to not succeed in higher education. That's what these numbers are telling me. And is it an issue? I mean, I know we're in a commission on race and access to equality. Is it a race issue, or is it a poverty issue? Or is it essentially a combination of both?
Well, it's obviously a combination of both if you look at it. The reason why you have all low income, because say KCTCS is our low cost, affordable, open enrolling institution, so they have a lot of low income. I'm putting that there to show you that we're going to have to focus on more low income in this next edition of whatever we do. So that's very purposeful that is there. But, you know, race has been shown too. So even without, that's why I put low income, and you can see that we have gaps we need to close, even when it comes to race, tremendous as a matter of fact, even when income is held constant. And that's an important piece, but it does add. That's why that multiplier on the performance funding is so good. It becomes more problematic or more disenfranchised as you put one on the other. So it's never one or the other. I've heard people say, well, it's all a poverty issue. Actually, it's not. But poverty is a huge piece. I'm a Black kid from Clay County, Kentucky, who was born to an illiterate father. I can tell you it's a piece. But it's both and. It's not either or.
All right, thank you.
President Thompson, not to interpret your data for you either, but something that we've seen, Senator Berg, in education policy over the years, the economy and opportunity has a direct correlation to enrollment. As we see an economy that's doing well, jobs are available, wages are good for entry-level sorts of positions, as they likely would have been in fall 2019, that drives down enrollment some.
It does.
And so there's a direct correlation there between persons seeking education and the immediate opportunity that they sense going out into the workforce right away. So all those factors, as is often the case, there's not going to be a single silver bullet solution to these questions. President Thompson, thank you. Wonderfully presented. I'm a huge fan of the work that you do. And as we've seen from our presenters today, I think data drives a lot of the decisions and the policy impacts. And so being one of our charges as a commission, this conversation we had about the lack of continuity of data through some of these systems, especially as it relates to the court system and the correction system and the parole system, may be something that we want to investigate a little further. I did have one note on the data piece. Mrs. Jones communicated to our staffers that she said she can also pull the data regarding women incarcerated and racial breakdown, and she will be getting that to our staff for them to disseminate to us. Seeing no other business to come before this commission today, we are adjourned with notice being given to you. Our next meeting is September the 22nd, and we appreciate everyone's attendance. Thank you.
Thank you.